Today, I will be giving a rundown of the movie Death Sentence, which released in 2007. Please note that there will be spoilers in my review. Without further ado, let's dive into the film. Nick and Helen are happily raising their two sons, who bring joy to their lives. Their older son, Brendan, has a passion for playing hockey, while their younger son, Lucas, is more emotionally inclined and enjoys art. Over time, Brendan's hockey skills have improved significantly. In fact, he was recognized as the top player on his high school team, which made his family extremely proud. Nick Hume, a businessman residing in North Carolina, leads a fulfilling family life. Despite occasional arguments and banter between Lucas and Brendan, which is typical for siblings of their age with different interests, they share a close bond and genuinely admire each other. Brendan has now turned his passion for hockey into a profession and is playing in the NHL. On the day of a game, Nick drives him to the rink. Each goal Brendan scores fills Nick with immense joy and excitement. On their way back home, Brendan shares his plan to move to Canada, aiming to elevate his hockey career to new heights. Nick wholeheartedly supports his son's decision, having complete faith in his skills and determination. They were driving through a dangerous neighborhood when two cars suddenly started swerving recklessly nearby, causing them great fear. Eventually, their cars ran out of fuel, forcing them to pull over at a gas station. Brendan went inside the store to grab a drink while Nick took the opportunity to call his wife and inform her about Brendan's future plans. Unfortunately, a group of thugs in one of the cars targeted the store for a robbery. Tragically, they shot and killed the store owner. These gangsters had a twisted initiation rule where newcomers had to kill a random person to join. Shockingly, the unlucky random person happened to be Brendan. The new gang member was hesitant and terrified, but under the leader's orders, he reluctantly slashed Brendan's throat with a machete. Witnessing this horrific act left Nick traumatized. In a fit of rage, he attacked the assailant, causing the rest of the gang to flee, but not before he managed to unmask one of them. The injured attacker escaped, while Nick rushed to his son and hurriedly took him to the hospital. The entire family arrived at the hospital only to receive the devastating news that Brendan had passed away. The depth of their grief was indescribable. The following day, Nick identified the killer, a 23-year-old named Joe, in a police lineup. Brendan's funeral took place on a somber, rainy day, but the pain and sorrow they felt couldn't be easily eased. The parents struggled to find solace in sleep, as memories of Brendan played constantly in their minds, and Lucas would break down in tears whenever he reminisced about his late brother. Before visiting the police, Helen asked Nick to ensure that the killer would receive a life sentence. The next day, Nick met with Detective Wallace and the district attorney. Nick became enraged when the district attorney informed him that due to lack of evidence, the defense would likely negotiate a light sentence for the killer. To make matters worse, the gas station's security camera was broken, leaving no record of the incident. Learning that Brendan had been murdered as part of a senseless gang initiation infuriated Nick even more. During the pretrial hearing, the judge asked Nick to testify against Joe as Brendan's killer, but to everyone's surprise, he refused, claiming that it had been too dark to see the killer's face clearly. This left everyone dumbfounded, and the judge dismissed the case. As a result, Joe was released from custody. Joe casually strolled into the courtyard, lighting a cigarette, while the gang praised him and welcomed him into their ranks. Even Billy, the gang's leader, expressed his pride, proclaiming, "I'm so proud of you. Now you've become a man." Unbeknownst to them, Nick was spying on them and began chasing after their cars. Joe was rewarded with a prostitute and a handful of cash by Billy. Disillusioned by the justice system, later that night, Nick could be seen searching for a weapon. He revealed to his family that the boy had been released due to a lack of evidence. Pretending to have left something at the office, he set off to find Joe. As Joe emerges from the building, he is taken aback by Nick's sudden presence. Consumed by rage, Nick launches an attack on Joe, resulting in a fierce struggle between the two. In the midst of their fight for survival, the knife accidentally pierces Joe's body, leaving him in a pool of his own blood. Witnessing the horrifying scene, Nick drives away, disposing of the bloodied knife. When he returns home, Helen becomes distressed upon seeing his injured hand and tends to it, leading them both to break down in tears. However, Nick now finds himself both a killer and a victim. Meanwhile, Billy pays a visit to Bones, his superior, who holds authority over the entire gang. Billy hands over the stolen money from the gas station robbery. Bones reprimands him for the meager amount of cash and dismisses him. Billy then arrives at the hideout, the gang's main base where they engage in meth production. One of his men, Bodie, informs him about Joe's death, leaving Billy shocked and infuriated. In the office, Detective Wallace pays a visit to Nick, informing him that his son's killer is dead. However, Detective Wallace becomes intrigued by the bandage on Nick's hand, suspecting that he may be connected to a revenge plot. At the gang's hangout bar, they gather to drink in Joe's honor, believing him to be a loyal soldier. Just then, Billy arrives and scolds them for showing insufficient respect towards Joe. They then resume discussing rival gangs who may have been responsible for Joe's death until one of the gang members reveals that his sister saw a man in a suit on the night Joe was killed. She confirms that the man in a newspaper photo is indeed Nick. Unaware of the danger looming over him, Nick re-bandages his hands on the street. Little does he know that Bodie, one of the gang members, is tailing him, while Billy keeps a watchful eye from a distance. Just before Bodie can shoot Nick, Nick manages to disarm him using his suitcase. Witnessing this, Billy and his men begin firing their weapons in the middle of the crowded street, causing fear and panic among the bystanders. In a desperate attempt to escape the gangsters, Nick races through a narrow alley while the gang members pursue him from all directions. Billy, driven by rage and a thirst for blood, relentlessly shoots at Nick, forcing him to abandon his suitcase in order to run faster. Billy shouts in anger, resembling a vampire consumed by vengeance, as if he had lost his own brother to Nick. Nick takes refuge in a nearby building, with the gangsters in hot pursuit. He eventually reaches a parking lot and, to confuse his pursuers, triggers multiple car alarms. Nick manages to reach the top floor, but the gang members continue their relentless chase. Fighting for his life, Nick finds himself trapped in a car with one of the thugs. As the car reverses, it careens across the multiple levels of the parking lot. Nick narrowly escapes, but the thug meets a tragic end, plummeting to his death. Following this intense ordeal, Nick receives a call from his wife and discovers that Lucas, their other son, has gone missing. Meanwhile, Detective Wallace arrives at the crime scene and finds the victim to be a member of the same gang as Joe. It becomes evident that Nick is involved. Nick eventually locates Lucas at the place where Brendan was killed. Lucas, devastated and full of resentment, berates his father for always favoring Brendan and disregarding his own feelings. Nick argues with Lucas, urging him to come home as it's a dangerous place to stay. Eventually, they manage to bring Lucas back home safely. Helen embraces Lucas, pleading with him never to leave home like that again. The next day, Bodie shows up at Nick's office and returns the suitcase he dropped during the chase. In a menacing manner, Bodie threatens Nick, insinuating that he has knowledge of Nick's impending death. Before being escorted out by security, Bodie ominously warns, "You have the right to know how you're dying." Upon opening the suitcase, Nick discovers a family photo that implies the gangsters plan to target his family, sparing Nick himself. Growing increasingly agitated, Nick calls a number found in the case, which belongs to Billy. Billy warns Nick that he has brought a death sentence upon his own family. Shockingly, it is revealed that Joe was Billy's brother. Without wasting any time, Nick urgently contacts his wife and Lucas, instructing them to stay indoors. He then calls the detective, conveying his anxiety and requesting backup forces. Upon returning home, Nick locks all the windows, leaving his family bewildered and panicked about the dire situation they find themselves in. Detective Wallace confronts Nick and reminds him that his own actions have endangered his family's lives. She urges him to confess to the murders, as the police are prepared to protect his family regardless. However, Nick adamantly refuses to confess. Later that night, while the family is asleep, Nick is awakened by a car alarm and soon discovers that the two police officers guarding his house have been brutally killed. In a matter of moments, the gangsters infiltrate his home. Nick fights back, narrowly avoiding gunfire and managing to injure one of the gang members. However, his efforts come to an end when the gang captures his family. In a merciless act, Billy swiftly shoots Helen, Lucas, and Nick. Days later, Nick is recovering in the hospital, consumed by guilt for the deaths of Helen and Lucas. While Helen has passed away, Lucas remains in a coma. Nick rushes to Lucas' side, apologizing for failing as a father. In a surprising turn of events, Nick escapes through a window, much to the detective's astonishment. He returns to his now forensic home the next day and proceeds to empty the family bank account, converting the funds into cash. With the help of a coworker, Nick locates the gang's hangout. He visits a cafe and attempts to gather information from the bartender, offering a significant sum of money. However, the bartender dismisses and insults him. Enraged, Nick viciously attacks both the bartender and a man who intervenes. Eventually, Nick learns Billy's whereabouts and obtains Bones' address to acquire weapons. Arriving at Bones' place, Nick initially faces indifference but eventually persuades Bones with a substantial amount of cash. Nick selects several weapons, including a shotgun and a handgun with ample ammunition. Before leaving, Bones reveals that Billy and Joe are his sons, and he is aware of Nick's plan to kill Billy. Bones assures Nick that he cannot be harmed by him. Consequently, Bones allows Nick to depart without a confrontation. Returning home, Nick inspects the guns and familiarizes himself with their use. He shaves his injured head and proceeds to go through Brendan's belongings, finding the jacket he wore on the day he died, which he puts on. With determination, Nick heads to the gang's location, eventually locating their hideout down a hallway. He bursts through the door using the shotgun, shocking the gang member inside. The gangster is left speechless, shocked to see that Nick is still alive. Nick dismisses the other girl present and holds the gangster at gunpoint. He extracts information about Billy's location from him. Nick successfully reaches Billy's place, instructing the gangster to call Billy. Billy realizes with astonishment that Nick has somehow survived, and the sound of gunfire informs him that his henchman has been killed. Meanwhile, Bones and his son, Billy, meet up. Bones warns Billy about the situation spiraling out of control and advises him to cease the fight against Nick. However, Billy callously shoots his own father to his demise. On the other hand, Nick breaks into the hideout, killing one of the gangsters in a car before giving him a chance to reload or escape. He proceeds further into the building, facing near-death encounters but ultimately eliminating each gang member one by one until only Billy remains. Approaching Nick, Billy believes that Nick is unarmed and taunts him, saying, "Look at you, you're one of us now." However, Nick surprises him by pulling out another weapon from his pocket, causing Billy's eyes to well up with tears. Nick kills Billy and then returns home. He starts watching the same old family video and awaits the inevitable moment of his arrest. Detective Wallace arrives and informs Nick that Lucas has started to move, expressing concern that Lucas may become involved in a life of crime, given his age and the traumatic experiences he has endured. She fears that Lucas may lack support and guidance, but Nick feels the weight of misery even more deeply. That's all from the video. Thanks for your time. And take care.